and everything?
Yes, we
Okay.
are live, Open Door Live with Vince Robinson, and my guests are Richard T. Andrews, the editor and publisher of The Real Deal Press, and Meryl Johnson. She is a member of the Ohio State Board of Education. We're here this afternoon to have a conversation about a proposed ban on critical race theory. Mr. Andrews has published a couple of articles that talk about these proposed bills by a couple of state representatives in Ohio. So why don't we start with what critical race theory is? And to those who are listening or viewing, you may have joined us on 360 Info Network this morning on AM 1490 WERE. We're really pleased to continue this conversation. We've got the technical difficulties ironed out. We're in the midst of Mercury retrograde. So, errors in communications and electronics are prevalent during these periods. At least that's been my experience. Some might disagree, but hey, experience is experience. Richard Andrews and Meryl Johnson, welcome to Open Door Live.
Thank you.
Glad to be here.
Okay.
So
yes.
In answer to your question about critical race theory, basically it's an academic tool that some scholars, initially legal scholars, people like Derek Bell, the late Derek Bell, who taught at Harvard Law School and was a civil rights activist, and Kimberly Crenshaw, who's also a law professor and legal scholar, who wanted to find ways to affect the discussion about public policy to make sure that the perspective of African American history and as it affects all of our systems was included in the public dialogue and in the academic research. And so it's just a way of emphasizing that the African American point of view needs to be included in discussions about public policy, race, our justice system, our education system, our health system.
Okay.
Everything else. Excuse me.
And
yes, please.
Yeah, I have having taught for 40 years, I always try to keep things easy to understand, simple, so everybody's on the same page. My definition, same as Richard's, but it's just worded in a different way. It's examining how systemic racism has been created in the United States through government policies. That's it. Examining how systemic racism exists in the United States through government policies. When you look at redlining, Richard mentioned health disparities. When you look at the mass incarceration of Black males, when you look at the selective use of the GI Bill, where thousands of white people were able to use it and only a handful of Black people, there's so many ways that government policies, segregation, there's so many ways that government policies have created systemic racism in this country. And that's what critical theory takes a look at that.
From your position on the State Board of Education, how do you receive legislation being proposed by this? I know you're extremely passionate about education, and I know you have an opinion about it. But from where you sit, how does it come to you? How does it affect you when you see that someone wants to propose this type of legislation?
Well, the State Board of Education, our role is to really put details on legislation that comes to us. For example, if the legislators say they want to have a third grade reading guarantee, then the job of the State Board of Education and the Department of Education is to put the details in it, to fine tune it, to make sure that everything is placed the way it should be. But looking at the other direction, and say, for instance, if we wanted, last year, we wanted to make sure that the third grade reading guarantee, that the score would be the same. It's called a cut score. The law says that the cut score for the third grade reading guarantee, or the score that students have to get to be proficient, has to be raised every year. Well, the State Board of Education proposed to the legislature that we not raise it last year because of the pandemic. So the legislature took that on, and they did do the legislation to make that happen. So that's kind of how, we can make recommendations to the legislature, or the legislature will give us something and we have to put the details on it. So that's kind of how it works.
Okay. Brother Richard, you've been studying this issue extensively. What do you think is the motivation for proposing this legislation?
I think there's several motivations, Vince. At its most base, it's about power. It's about controlling the narrative. If you can control the narrative, you can control the history, then you can set the tone, set the direction, have an easier time, affecting your will politically, economically, and so forth. On another level, it's psychological. What critical race theory does, in effect, is it challenges a lot of the myths upon which our public discourse, our public understanding is based. And when you challenge myths that somebody's grown up with, that makes them uncomfortable, makes them unhappy. They don't want to believe it. They don't want to accept it, and they want to find ways to reject it. So challenging critical race theory, attempting to keep it out of the educational arena is a way of doing that. So I would say those are the two primary motivations. Okay. And the third, I would say, is also political. If you keep the focus on cultural issues, and this is in part a cultural issue, then you can keep your base stirred up. You can get them responding emotionally to issues, and then they don't notice that you are depriving them of $300 a week coming from the federal government, or that you are ripping off millions of dollars in utility fees for nuclear power plants. You're doing all other kinds of corrupt things, but they're not concerned about that because you're fighting for them on these cultural issues that you made them think are more important than the economic issues or quality of life issues.
Okay. Meryl, I have to ask you, what would you anticipate being an impact or an outcome if this type of legislation were to pass?
Well, I think the main income would be you would continue to have a lot of uninformed students. You would have students who don't feel empowered to do anything about the situation that they live in every day. One of the things that I consider to be really just outrageous about these bills is that it doesn't want it to be taught that the United States is a racist or a sexist country. There are so many examples of that. We just talked about some, but the teacher is not allowed to deal with that. They don't want students to be able to lobby. So therefore, students will be feeling powerless. I have no power over anything that's happening in this country or in my life. There's just so many. They don't want teachers to discuss current events. So when students see something on TV, Floyd's murder, for example, that parents may be upset or not have time to really talk about it, where can students really air their feelings and their opinions about what's happening in the world? That has been our classroom. And, teachers don't direct how students should think. They don't teach them what to think. They teach them how to think and how to critically think. And so if these bills were to pass, House Bill 322 and House Bill 327, it would just put muzzles on our educators and create robots in our students. I mean, I can't put it any other way. They have minds. They read. They see what's happening in the world, and students deserve to know that they have some power to make a difference.
This question is to both of you. Do you think that it's realistic to assume that keeping this information out of the classroom is going to keep it out of the headspace of children who are watching the news, who are plugged into social media and all the other things that provide ways for them to to find out what's going on in the world today?
I think to Meryl's point, you wouldn't necessarily keep it out of their heads, but it would make it more difficult for them to have a framework for trying to understand it.
Mm-hmm.
How do you order all this information, and if it comes across in a confusing manner, then what human nature tends to say is, I can't process this. I don't know what sense to make of it.
Mm-hmm.
I either got to find some higher authority, which could be a demagogue, a charlatan, a cult leader, and say, I'm just going to let them decide, and whatever they tell me is what I'm going to believe, or I'm going to tune it out entirely, and pretend that it doesn't have anything to do with my life. I do want to add one other thing to what Meryl said in terms of the effects if this legislation passes, and that is, I think there would be enormous confusion on the part of teachers, because the way these proposed laws are being set out, it's impossible to know where to draw any lines about what you can talk about,
Right,
and what you can say. And
Mm-hmm.
so you wind up having a lot of school board battles, and then probably litigation eventually,
Mm-hmm.
and challenges as to whether these laws are even enforceable.
And just to add to that, when you look at what's going on, social and emotional aspects of the conversation, the things that are happening can create first of all, students come to school with a lot of trauma. And as a result of the pandemic, the trauma is basically going to be 100% of our students. And so when they see what's happening on TV, and Black men being killed by police, and all of this stuff going on, where do they process? Where do they get help with that trauma? Being able to express your feelings, being able to talk about what's going on with a trusted adult who is going to be your teacher, of course, your parents, but again, parents may not have the time to do that. But knowing that you can go to school in a safe space and you can process the trauma of all the things that you have seen and heard, that's really that's a good thing. And these bills would just stop that, shut the door on it, and that is just devastating.
It's also interesting because the proponents of this legislation are arguing for the authenticity of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence and all of that. But at the same time, you're seeing an erosion of the right to free speech and other things. How can you juxtapose one against the other and say that it's right for you to take away people's ability to express themselves about things that are relevant and important?
Mm-hmm. And what about, this is the best example of cancel culture, right? They don't like cancel culture, but we're going to cancel everything that teachers are allowed to do in the classroom. But I want to share something with you. I want you to hear a quote from the sponsor of one of the bills, 322. And so when you talked about what's the motivation, this is what Representative Don Jones has to say. Critical race theory is a dangerous and flat out wrong theory. It is designed to look at everything from a race first lens, which is the very definition of racism, and I disagree. CRT claiming to fight racism is laughable. Now, here's the thing. Students should not be asked to examine their whiteness or check their privilege, says Jones. That's one of the motivations. There's some feeling that student feelings are being hurt, or they're being asked to check their privilege and so forth. And even if that happens, if it does happen, it's not happening to cause students or to make them feel guilty or ashamed. It's happening to make sure that all the students in the classroom can recognize the authentic history of our country and understand how to deal with it.
Okay. Richard, I'm sure you had something to add to that.
Well, I agree with what Meryl just said, of course, in terms of trying to get an understanding of the authentic history of the country. And that goes back to what I was saying earlier this morning, I guess in another discussion that we had about myth making. People being comfortable with their myths. If I'm comfortable believing that my culture is all good and superior to all other cultures, and you're challenging that by saying let's examine it and see the worth of other cultures. I'm not comfortable hearing that. That upsets me, because I'm not eager to change my worldview. I'm much more comfortable believing I'm the best.
Yep.
It's also interesting, and we talked about the language earlier in our other conversation about how confusing it is. There's really no clarity about the message that they're giving us, other than they don't want us to do something, and that is engage in this conversation about the importance of race in our history.
They want to control the narrative in its entirety, and there's different cultures have different ways of saying this, but and I'm going to botch it. I wrote this down elsewhere, but I don't have it accurately in front of me. But the story of the safari would be different if the lions won, and we're writing that history. So that's where I say it's about power.
And I just want to add to that. I think one of the things that is, as adding to the conversation, one of the other motivations, in July of 2020, the State Board of Education passed a resolution, one of my proudest moments in the 4 years that I've been on the state board. And we passed a resolution condemning hate and racism, and to advance equity and opportunity for Black students, Indigenous students, and students of color, other students of color. And I just want to share the first resolve with you, because our resolution is being called critical race theory, just so you know. And anyway, this is what the first resolve says. Resolve that the State Board of Education condemns in the strongest possible terms white supremacy culture, hate speech, hate crimes, and violence in the service of hatred. These immoral ideologies and actions deserve no place in our country, state, and school system. That resolution can be found on the Ohio Department of Education's website. But we have been accused of having a critical race theory resolution. It's been called racist. In October and November, during our public participation period, there were so many people who came in speaking against our resolution, saying all kinds of toxic, racist things, and it just really set them off. And there's nothing racist about the resolution. It's simply saying we condemn white supremacy and hate, and we want school districts to do audits of their districts so they can look at their curriculum, their professional development, their hiring practices, their discipline policies. It simply says that. So I just think that's something else that may have fed into these bills.
Those things that you just mentioned, because I do want to talk about solutions, and they seem to be some of the solutions that could counteract the impact of removing critical race theory from our educational systems.
Well, I don't want to remove it. It doesn't need to be removed. There's nothing wrong with critical race theory.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with it. We need to examine why systemic racism exists. The people who are against critical race theory say there is no such thing as systemic racism. The vice president of the State Board of Education, who happens to be an African American, said that. She said there's no such thing as systemic racism. So that's one of those myths that Richard was talking about, that people are talking about. And
hold up. Somebody said that racism doesn't exist, and they're in.
Yeah, our vice president on the state board, during our discussion about the resolution last year, said that there is no such thing as systemic racism. And
who is that?
That's our vice president of the state board.
What's her name?
Charlotte McGuire. And you can play, the meetings are all available on the ohiochannel.gov, and you can play the meeting from July, the second Tuesday in July. of 2020, and you can listen to it for yourself. As a matter of fact, listen to our most recent board meeting, the last 20 minutes, this second Tuesday in May, and listen to it. But she feels very strongly that systemic racism doesn't exist.
On the subject of the, if I may, Vince, on the subject of the state board, I don't know if this is something that you can comment on, Meryl, but I believe that the president of the board stepped down, resigned, and was succeeded by actually black man from Cleveland.
I haven't seen that. Where'd you see that?
Robert Hurd.
Oh, you're talking about the. You shocked me, Richard. I'm like, what? I haven't heard that. No, you're getting the State Board of Education mixed up with the Ohio State Board of Education, OSBA, Ohio State Board Association. So those are that's a collection of all the local boards in Ohio.
Okay.
And that's interesting. That board president did step down because he was saying the same thing. There was no systemic racism and so forth. He was talking the same talk that the anti-critical race theory people talk, and he got so much pushback from that language that he resigned. And so Robert Hurd, a board member from Cleveland, did step into that position. Yes.
Okay. Thanks for clarifying that for me.
Thanks for bringing it up. That's how those myths get started.
Richard, when she mentioned the name of that vice president, I saw your gears turning. Can we anticipate a conversation with that person and an article to follow in the Real Deal Press?
I definitely want to learn more about this Charlotte McGuire.
Yeah, listen to the meetings. So you can especially the last 20 minutes of this May Tuesday meeting. Just listen to the last 20 minutes. I had to challenge her on some things she was saying, but just listen to it.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I would assume that she's more likely appointed than elected.
She is elected from the Dayton area.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so we're just going to take a few more minutes because I know, Brother Richard, you have some things to attend to, and I know, Meryl, you have a radio show to do momentarily.
Well, my radio show, I do it at home, and so it will be on at 1:00. But I do want to get to the town hall on voter suppression, which is happening now at the Jerry Sue Thornton Center on East 22nd. So I do want to run to that. But yeah, my radio show will be around critical race theory, and let me just do a plug. I'm interviewing 6 white mothers, 6 white mothers from all over the place, Berea, Parma, and I selected them because the face of the people against critical race theory has been white parents. And so I wanted to get some people who really believe in critical race theory and are not happy with 322 and 327. But Vince, I want to say one more thing real quick. I watched one of the webinars for the people who are against critical race theory, and I watched it because one of our board members, Kirsten Hill, who went to DC on January 6th, was one of the main speakers of this webinar speaking against critical race theory. And so I watched it to see what she would say. And they are against words like equity, words like diversity, inclusion. Those are triggers to them that critical race theory is happening in this school. Words like courageous conversation, social justice. They hate all that. They say equity is a bad thing. Here's their explanation. With equity, you're going to be taking something from someone to give it to somebody else. But equality, then everybody is equal. So how unrealistic is that? You can't have equality until you have equity. And if you look at how Ohio schools are funded and why it's so important for this Fair School Funding Plan to get passed, you'll see that we cannot have equality until we have every student getting what he or she needs.
Okay, real quickly, tell us how we can view the program that you're about to initiate.
My radio program, 1 o'clock, WRUW 91.1 FM, or you can listen online at WRUW.org. And if you miss it, we archive for 2 weeks. You can just go to WRUW archives and you can put in the time and date of my show. But it's WRUW.org.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to get to put that in real quick so folks would
Thank
know
you,
how to
Vince. I
do that.
appreciate it.
Yeah. So let's talk about what we should be doing. You know, those of us who are sitting here hearing about this, some maybe for the first time have an interest in it. What should we do to prevent what they want to happen from happening?
Well, one thing certainly, beyond continuing to educate ourselves on these issues, is to begin to be much more in contact with our state legislators.
Yes.
Reach out to your state representative, reach out to your state senator, reach out to the sponsors of the legislation. Let them know how you feel about this and why, and don't be afraid to express outrage in whatever form you're comfortable doing that in. That's just basic. We've got to become much more active participants in the public space.
Yeah, the reason this stuff happens is because they don't get much pushback. I've heard from legislators that nobody calls, nobody sends us emails. And if you send emails and if you call, then sometimes that'll cause a bill not to even reach the floor. They get enough people resisting and not liking what's going on. But if we don't say anything or do anything, then they could do anything they want. There are so many bad bills going through the legislature right now. There's an anti-protest bill. There's voter suppression bill. There's a bill where they want to give every child in Ohio a voucher, meaning that they want to take money from our school districts to allow children to go to private schools. Right now, millions of dollars is being lost from a number of districts. But there's a bill there from Matt Huffman. Senator Matt Huffman is a sponsor that would say every child in Ohio gets a voucher. 90% of our children in Ohio attend public schools. That would devastate the public school system. And then you have 322 and 327. 327, the sponsor is Representative Diane Grendell, Grendell. And for 322, the sponsor is Representative Don Jones. Call them, email them, bug them. I know Senator Matt Huffman, I heard that he was starting to get a little annoyed. Well, not annoyed, but he mentioned that he's getting a lot of pushback on the vouchers for everybody bill. So that's what we have to do. We have to let them know you're not going to do this stuff. Our tax dollars pay for your job. We've elected you, or maybe not. I know I didn't vote for them, but we've got to speak out. We are the people. We should be running what's happening in this state.
Well, it seems as though we should have some type of an organized campaign to make sure that those legislators hear from us so that they know that we're concerned. Are you aware of any organized effort to do something about this?
I'm not aware of any organized effort. See, when you have so many bad bills out there, people are putting their energy. I know there's an organized effort on the voter suppression bill. That's why they're having the town hall right now. I know there's an organized effort against the vouchers for everybody. Cleveland Heights is leading that. And also there's litigation. There's a lawsuit in place that's going to be doing a lawsuit on how vouchers are funded. So I'm not aware. I'm not saying there isn't any, but I'm not aware of any organized effort against 322 and 327 yet. Okay, not yet. But after this, hopefully there will be.
Well, if there isn't, there should be.
I agree.
Vince, when we were younger, we used to joke about Ohio being Mississippi North, Alabama North. There was even a book, actually, with some historical grounding about Cleveland that was called Alabama North, written by a historian. And I think that relates to the fact that so much of the people from the Great Migration who left Alabama wound up in Cleveland, because that's from Alabama and Georgia, because that's the way the trails went, But, our present day reality, if you look at what goes on in our state legislature, we are absolutely Mississippi North in terms of the number of bad bills that operate, if passed, to suppress Black political interests, progressive interests. We're in a state that's under the control of reactionaries, and we've got to organize to counteract some of this, because it has so much to do with the quality of life here in Ohio for all of us.
Right. And I misspoke. There is an organized effort, and I shouldn't have said what I said. The Ohio Federation of Teachers, which is the state teachers union, my state teachers union, I know is organizing against these bills. And the Ohio Education Association also, President Melissa Cropper of Ohio Federation of Teachers and President Scott DeMoro of the Ohio Education Association, they are organizing, among their members, since educators are the ones who are really the target of these bills. So I did misspeak when I said that. But also, these bills are coming down from ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council. And for those of you who have not heard of ALEC, Google ALEC Exposed. It's a group of about 2,000 right-wingers who sit on high and do all this model legislation. They did Stand Your Ground. They do the voucher and charter stuff. They did Senate Bill 5. They have done, now they've done the anti-critical race theory legislation. They passed their legislation down to dues-paying members in every state. And that's why you have the same legislation going on. I think I read 15 states so far have proposed this anti-critical race theory stuff. So that's where the stuff is coming from. It's not just being created here in Ohio. It's coming from the American Legislative Exchange Council, and their goal is to privatize everything. Nothing that they do is good for working people or for people of color. So that's where it's coming from. So examine who they are. American Legislative Exchange Council. Just Google ALEC Exposed or Google ALEC in Ohio, and you'll come up with it.
Well, Meryl, thank you for that. It's heartening to know that there is an organized effort.
Yeah.
So I know you got to go. I just want to compliment you on that beautiful piece that is behind you.
Oh, thank you. That's straight. That's straight from South Africa. Okay. Yeah, from Johannesburg. Yes.
It's gorgeous, just as you are, and I know that you are definitely the queen of purple. So, you and my mom.
Thank you.
Yes. So folks can tune into your show on 91.1 WRUW at 1 o'clock. So it's 11 minutes away. We encourage folks to tune in and get some more insight on this issue.
It's really gonna be. It's good. So make sure you. Good.
So we want Meryl to know, by the way, that she needs to know that both of us, you and I, Vince, have on purple ties.
I love it. Y'all did it just for me, right?
Absolutely.
I love it. I love it.
That's what happens when the planets line up, because they call it synchronicity in some circles.
I love it. It's beautiful. Matter of fact, I'm getting ready to take a picture, so don't move.
Okay.
Okay, I got it. Thank you.
Okay. And Mr. Andrews, I like the new look. I haven't seen you for a while. I know you parted with your hair, and it looks good on you, bruh.
Well, thank you. It was growing down at my collar. I was getting very uncomfortable, so I just bought something and I started trimming it. And I knew the result would be that it would all disappear, because trying to get it even when you're an amateur.
But both of you look quite handsome.
Thank you. So, Richard, before we conclude this conversation, somebody kind of cracked in the radio show, said, well, it's not a paper, but we're going to call it a paper anyway, whether it's online or sitting on a newsstand somewhere. We're not going to let folks disrespect you like that. Folks, check out the Real Deal Press. How do they do it?
Well, there it is going across the screen. I call it a digital news site, 24/7 digital news site. We publish copy every day, much of it original. Some of it we aggregate from other sites, but we try to focus on news and information that's especially important to people of color in Northeast Ohio.
Well, brother, you're doing a fantastic job on it. I commend you for doing what others are not doing right now. It is vital, it's necessary, and it's great that we can go somewhere and get some intelligent discourse on what's going on in our city, our county, our state, and in the country. So both of you, I really appreciate you joining me, and I hope that we'll be able to continue this conversation as things develop. Thanks for joining me on Open Door.
Thank you, Vince.
Thank you.
Good to see both of you. Take care.
Have a good weekend. Bye-bye.
All right. Peace, blessings, and prosperity. And as always, know yourself, love yourself, be yourself, and make today your best day. Peace.
Peace.
Thank you.